Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first episode, the inaugural episode of GOATQuest. The great debate rages on. Who is the greatest of all time? What is the greatest of all time? Who's the GOAT? I am joined by former Detroit Lion, Tom Beer. It's Joe Willie and the Beer Man. Beer Man, how you doing?
I'm doing good.
It's good. It's good to
My
see
old
you.
teammate from Wayne State.
That's right. We did play college football together, so
Yeah.
hopefully the audience can sense the rapport, the comfort level that we have in taunting one another.
Yes.
We're going to taunt each other today about the greatest NFL football teams. And to keep this in the current event window, that first phase starts with the 2024-2025 season. The Super Bowl in February will be in New Orleans. On the other side of the calendar in 2025, we're looking at Super Bowl predictions. Obviously, your NFL alma mater for once in our lifetime is strategically positioned in the mix. So tell me right off the bat, just prima facie case, why do our probably our most ardent fans here in the Detroit area where we record, why should they be so optimistic?
We've got everybody back. We've got two new, we have four new cornerbacks that I think are all starters at some time in that they've been in the NFL. We added a couple defensive linemen. That's going to help our D-line. I think our linebackers are fine. And we got another year under our belt.
Detroit Lions have another year under their belt after going to the NFC Championship game.
Right.
The pieces of the puzzle that needed to come together, I think on the D-line, they plugged in some nice changes, some nice pieces. You mentioned the defensive backfield, and the defensive backfield starts with the number one pick as far as the enhancements are concerned. Terrion Arnold from Alabama. Do you think he steps in and makes an immediate impact?
I think so. I think our second pick,
Rickstraw.
I think he's as good as Terrion Arnold, to be honest with you. I think they're both equal. They're a little different. But, we haven't seen that much of them, unless you've been to a practice. They don't play in games. Terrion Arnold just got hurt. And Rickstraw, he's played a little bit and looked good. But we're not going to know to the regular season. But so far, so good.
They picked up Carlton Davis from Tampa Bay. That's going to be a nice back end. They're going to be looking at a more formidable defense, I think, overall. Campbell's a year older. We'll see if he comes into his own and picks up that middle linebacker load that maybe was a little bit lacking, especially in the passing game.
Yeah.
But I think it all hinges on Jared Goff. And obviously he got the big deal. He's got the money in the bank. Now he's going to have to convert that into more wins on the field than last year. You only need one more win than he had last year to get to New Orleans. I don't want to dominate this thing with the Lions, but to put a final point on it, Montgomery and Gibbs, probably the best running back tandem running behind one of the best offensive lines.
Yeah.
If Jared Goff stays healthy, do you see any reason why they're not playing the San Francisco 49ers again in the NFC title?
No, but you got to get lucky. You got to get a little lucky. You got to have the right guys not get hurt, right? And you've got to make some plays. My gosh. How many games towards the end did the Lions have to make a play at the end of the game to win, right? Yeah. Against Minnesota. I thought that was a touchdown when it left the Minnesota quarterback's hands and he picked it off in the end zone. And you just got to make plays at the right time. All these teams have good players. And it does, we lost to Chicago last year, right? We lost to Green Bay last year.
Ruined my Thanksgiving dinner.
I know. Me too. At any time, any team's good enough to beat you. So we just got to make plays when we have to make plays.
That's right. Okay, so the way I'm bucking it, you mentioned that the league has gotten better. The division has gotten better. The Chicago Bears are a lot better. We'll see whether or not Sam Darnold can replace Kirk Cousins in Minnesota, but you have to believe Green Bay is going to be better. And then, of course, the Detroit Lions are the class of that division. When I bucket it out, and this was what I was most amazed at, I think there's only 9 teams in the NFL that are out of it on day one. that are just, Tennessee, New Orleans, Seattle, the Las Vegas Raiders have a great defense, but not much going on offense unless Gardner Minshew, has some kind of career year. The New York Giants, the Arizona Cardinals, the Washington Commanders, Carolina, and the abysmal New England Patriots. What a cluster that is in New England. Bill Belichick, by the way, not even finding a job in the offseason because he left that roster in such utter disarray. So those teams are out of it. After that, I think you got a group of teams that are good, but haven't really done enough in the offseason to set themselves apart. So the Jets, we'll see if Aaron Rodgers, the Los Angeles Rams, a playoff team, the Cleveland Browns, maybe the best defense in the NFL. We'll see, but it's all about Deshaun Watson. Houston Texans made some moves in the offseason. They are trying to get out of that group. So they're the one that I think has the best chance of getting out of that group. But I see a sophomore slump maybe for C.J. Stroud, so I'm going to keep him in that group. The Steelers, because Mike Tomlin does nothing but win and make the playoffs. And then the Tampa Bay Bucks, we'll see that they're pretty much the same roster. Gained a piece, missed a piece. And the Jacksonville Jaguars that were supposed to be very good last year and somehow didn't show up at all. That's my mid group. My rising group would be the Atlanta Falcons, made a lot of nice moves. The Chargers, because Harbaugh comes in and that guy just wins.
Yeah.
The Chicago Bears, totally revamped roster. They're going to be formidable. And then we'll see what happens if this resurgence in Denver with Sean Payton can come to the realization. Looks like Bo Nix might be legit, but hasn't played in a real NFL game. We'll find out what that's all about. Those are kind of the grab-all teams. Did I mention any grab-all teams in there that you think shouldn't be in there, that need to be in that top 10?
No, but, like Atlanta, I know they've done some good stuff, but, their draft picks don't work out. They're in trouble, right? So, that's a team that hasn't won in a while, right?
With a coach that's bounced around.
Yeah, bounced around. Who knows? Sometimes things come together, they just gel, and sometimes they don't. So, there's a lot of if comes, I think, with Atlanta.
Drafting Penix when you just spent a fortune on Kirk Cousins?
I know. How does that make sense? They don't have to pay Penix. He's a rookie. So they don't have to pay him like they have to pay Kirk Cousins, I should say. But, we had a conversation earlier about a good backup. How important it is to have a good backup. We're talking about the Lions earlier. And it's tough. You got to pay people too much money. It's tough to pay anybody else but the main guy.
You think Harbaugh finds a way to get the Chargers in the playoffs in his first season? The guy, everywhere he goes, and especially his 10 years in the NFL, have been super, super successful. He's got the pieces. He's got a great quarterback in Herbert, who I think needs somebody like him to light a fire under him. And he's got Khalil Mack and Bosa. He's got two of the best edge rushers.
Yeah. Do I think coaching gets too much attention? Yeah. Do I think players play? Does it matter who Coach Barry? No.
Fontes?
No.
Wayne Fonts?
No. Doesn't matter. So, sure, coaching does come into place, but I think it's more player personnel in the draft picks that you get, in the process that you've got that gets those draft picks to make sure you get the right draft picks. I think that's more important than a coach calling plays.
I agree with you. I think you can go. My first statement about the dumpster fire that is the New England Patriots right now, they supposedly had the best coach of all time. I've never understood that. He won nothing without Tom Brady. I think without the greatest quarterback of all time, maybe the greatest individual player of all time, what did Belichick accomplish? To me, the whole Belichick mystique needs to be re-examined in light of what is left in New England and what he did without Brady.
It takes a special coach to be able to sell that pitch, right? To be afraid of the head coach. It's just a different world we live in now. It's old school's out. I hate to say it, I love old school. I love, seeing that, but it's just the players are looking for something different. And I said that too. I said right when Brady went to Tampa Bay, I had a couple buds that said, "Oh, he's never going to win," and the New England Patriots are going to be just like they were without Brady. Well, we saw what happened. No.
And Brady puts an extra stamp on that by going to Tampa Bay and winning the Super Bowl You know,
No question.
and I think it's no question it was clearly in the hands of Tom Brady. So obviously, the New England Patriots had some great defensive teams. They did win
Yes.
with defense, and that gets me back on track into this top 10 list, because the bottom of my top 10, and this is a paper thin team when it comes to depth. When you go beyond their first 22 players, if Dallas has injuries, the Dallas Cowboys will be a changed team very quickly. But they have the number 3 defense in the NFL, and they have probably the most dynamic player in Parsons on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, I know that's debatable, but the things that guy can do to change the game, we don't see very often on the NFL field. I look at Dallas and Miami as the bottom of that top 10.
Let's say we lost Hutchinson, we lost, our quarterback. We'd be in trouble. We have no one to replace them.
Yeah.
So we do have some backups, but most teams, they're built. You got to pay the people that make the plays. And if they get hurt, you got to deal with it.
That salary cap gymnastics, do you see, I mean, obviously Howie in Philadelphia gets a lot of credit for what the Philadelphia Eagles have been able to do to recalibrate that roster so quickly. But again, I think
draft picks, Joe. That's the only way you don't have to pay them $50 million a year or $30 million a year. You get draft picks and you develop them. If you don't do that, if you got to sign free agents all the time for 3 years, $90 million, you're not going to have enough money.
No.
So it's the draft picks.
No, and we talked about this. It's a double win.
Yes.
It's not just the win of their contribution on the field. It's the win of their contribution on the ledger of the cap table. So those draft picks become at least 1.5 importance on a scale when everybody else is even.
No question.
The free agency market, I mean, Jordan Love. Okay, we're going to talk about Green Bay. They're right there. Philly and Green Bay were my next two. That's why I brought up Philly and the Green Bay Packers. If I'm looking at an NFL power ranking, Green Bay looked great at the end of the year. They gave San Francisco all the Niners wanted. They played San Francisco right to the end. Could have, should have beat them. Many people would say Jordan Love was the best quarterback in the second half of the season. But let me stop there. He got $222 million, $155 million of it guaranteed, and a $75 million check as a signing bonus struck and in his bank account for a half a season. He hasn't been consistently good in any of his previous performances. He was lukewarm at best. There was a moment week 4, week 5, where they were like, is this the guy? There was a big question mark.
I remember that.
The second half of the season, all of a sudden he's worth $222 million. And Jared Goff, of course, we love his contribution. Is he a $200 million guy?
Before last season, was he getting $200 million? No. But he played right, played good at the right time, in the right games, in front of the right people, and you got to pay him. I understand how you have to pay Jordan Love. I mean, he was a top draft pick. Played right at the right time, didn't go to the Super Bowl, but almost beat the Super Bowl, or the team that went to the Super Bowl. And, we had them beat too.
That's right.
We had the 49ers beat too,
That's right.
Up by 17 going into the fourth quarter.
Yeah, we're going to release a little Lions Diary video that I put together of last season that you're featured in when we went down to the season opener. We'll be at the season opener again. I know this sounds strange to say, have established themselves, as I do think that the toughness, and I know that can be overrated, the toughness of teams in playing, being able to play through injuries, kind of taking on the demeanor of the head coach, I think that clearly resides in the NFC. But Andy Reid, John Harbaugh, Zach Taylor in Cincinnati, McDermott in Buffalo. I mean, these are good coaches and good football teams. Any one of those 4 football teams, although Buffalo now with Milano out, that you lose your defensive captain, who knows how long he's going to be out. I'd move Buffalo out of that list, but I would say Kansas City, Baltimore, Cincinnati. Would you be surprised if any one of those 3 won a Super Bowl?
No, not at all. But, who can stay healthy? Who can, make it through the bouts of unhealthy players? right? If Joe Burrow goes down, what happens? I don't. Do we even know who the backup is? I don't right now for Cincinnati.
Yeah.
I can't name them.
It's
Yeah,
Browning.
I mean,
It's Browning.
Okay,
the
well, you
Washington
can hardly
quarterback.
name a backup for any team. It's not that difficult. It's difficult. Just because
You can't name the head coaches of these teams anymore. The way the coaching carousel is spun around.
It's in and out. It's a different sport than it was when I played. Yeah, you got to get lucky, and you got to make plays at key times.
So who's going to get lucky? Who is the Power Five? Who's your final five going into this season, and who's going to win the Super Bowl?
I've got Baltimore. Obviously, they got a great defense. They got probably one of the best, the most dynamic quarterbacks in the NFL. I like the Texans. I think I think they'll win their division. They got a great young quarterback. They got a young defense. So I like what they have. The Bills, I still think they'll win their division. KC, obviously. Lions, obviously.
What's the game? Who wins it? Two teams playing in New Orleans. Who wins it?
I'd say Baltimore and the Lions.
And
what?
Who wins it?
Oh, the Lions, of course.
The Detroit Lions.
The Detroit Lions.
Tom Beard.
And I have never said that before in my life.
The bias takes over. I'm pretty similar. I've got Cincinnati at 5, San Francisco at 4, Detroit at 3, Baltimore at 2, and KC at 1. If I had to, but obviously only one of those two AFC teams is going to make it. Sure. I also have Baltimore making the Super Bowl. I also have the Detroit Lions making the Super Bowl.
What are we even doing this for? You're just copying me.
I think that the Detroit Lions are going to find a way to beat San Francisco. I do think it's going to be in Ford Field, and that's the deciding factor. I don't think that the Lions are a better football team than San Francisco. I think that it being in Ford Field with home field advantage is going to tilt the coin just enough to get the Lions into the Super Bowl. But I'm gonna disappoint you here because I think Baltimore is going to win the Super Bowl.
So, and look what we have now. We have for sure 2 starters that we traded for. Our 2 our first and second round pick. All 4 of them are good.
Yeah.
All 4 of them are much better than what we had in the NFC Championship last year. So on that alone, cornerbacks are so important to a defense. They just make everything easier for the D linemen, for the linebackers, for everybody. They got more room.
The backfield for Baltimore just got too good with Derrick Henry and Justice Hill both in the. And when you look at Baltimore top to bottom, Lamar Jackson, Mark Andrews. If Mark Andrews is healthy, if Lamar Jackson plays remotely like he does during the season in the playoffs, which is the big question for him, I think Baltimore is too tough to beat. But I will be rooting for your Detroit Lions.
Yes. Did we forget about Aaron Rodgers?
I want to forget about Aaron Rodgers.
Well, so
I want to forget about him going to
those 60-yard freaking touchdowns he throws at the end of the game to a tight end. And then actually the guy from Michigan. Who was the guy from Grand Valley that played? David.
Eric Lynch?
No.
Kirkus, Circus Kirkus?
Circus Kirkus.
Dave Kirkus.
Davis Kirkus.
But when you look at these, like Aaron Rodgers, all right, if he disappeared and went into the jungle and inhaled ayahuasca, would you really miss this guy? I mean, he is such a buffoon. I just look
Aaron
at
Rodgers?
Aaron Rodgers. I just think he's a goofball. It can't be good for the team to have him showing up late to camp, to have him always trying to be a distraction.
Do you know that?
It's just what I'm getting this
I've never
through
heard that.
the mainstream media channels, and I'm not claiming that it's fake news or it's true news.
When you're in New York, just win. If he wins, it doesn't matter. I mean, I know. If he's showing up late for camp and disrupting meetings and fucking stuff up, obviously that's different. But he's obviously got his $40 million guaranteed every year, right? I'm sure.
I'm not trying to make it like you have to be a good guy to win in the NFL. I don't care about that. But I sure like it when the karma train comes around the bend and runs a guy like him over. That's just my perspective.
Well, you're a Lions fan, number one. Number two, I think he's going to have a great year. I think he's got a great defense.
the best defense, possibly the best defense in the NFL.
Well, he's got the best names. We'll see how they do when they play together, but he's got the most talented names on the front four of his defense. And he's got a great receiver. He's got some good running backs. And he's Aaron Rodgers, and he's still slinging the ball well. I don't know. I mean, why would we think that he wouldn't be any different than he was in Green Bay?
I look at the strength of schedule in some of these teams, and some of the teams have much greater strength of schedule than others. I mean, I pulled up a list.
Yeah, but Joe, look at the parity in the NFL.
I know there's parity. I know there's parity, but
I don't know if there's a. I don't know if there's a.
Look at this for a second, okay? So I don't have who they play.
Oh, you don't have who they play.
No, I don't have who they play.
Okay.
But
so the Cleveland Browns have the worst schedule or the best schedule?
The Cleveland Browns have the toughest schedule.
The toughest schedule.
Yeah, their opponents were winning teams almost all across the board.
Why would Baltimore have one of the toughest?
This is what I don't understand about the way the NFL has. I mean, I know the NFL likes their storylines, right? So they try to set up the schedule to fit some of these interesting storylines. But when you end up being a Cleveland Browns fan and you got the toughest schedule in the NFL, you barely made the playoffs with a backup quarterback that was 40 years old. I mean, I don't think they earned the worst schedule in the NFL or the toughest schedule in the NFL.
Back to my original thing. If injuries come in, like for instance, does it matter who we're playing if we have Jared Goff?
I would hope not.
Okay. If we don't,
we got a lot of problems.
We got a lot of problems.
This Sudfeld, I just don't get it.
No, he's not going to be. He's not going to be in there. The guy can't even run out of bounds correctly.
I watch him and I watch him and you know.
I think Hendon Hooker's looked awesome. I think he makes fast decisions. He's got great feet. He's got vision. I think he looks great.
Then why not move him on the depth chart and put Hooker in the number 2 spot?
Preseason. Everything everybody does in preseason means nothing, Joe.
I'm frightened of Sudfeld ever seeing the football field.
When we played spring ball, does it matter what the fuck you did in spring ball?
It doesn't matter what
you did in spring ball. Doesn't matter.
But you got to practice with purpose, and you got to prepare for championships, and games are won and lost in the offseason. How many other cliches can I come up with?
Yeah, I know. All these cliches get thrown out the door when you got Tom Brady at quarterback.
And when Mike Tyson, I think, said it best, right?
Yeah,
everybody's game plan changes when you get punched in the face.
Correct. I also think that a football player needs to play football before the first game of the year. And we don't play any of our starters. None. Other teams do. Patrick Mahomes played the other night. He played a quarter or two. Dude, you got to get in there. Football's, you can't train for it. I don't care how hard you work out and what you do. It's different when you're in the game. And we don't play any of our starters, but that's a whole nother issue.
I will say this. When I look at the strength of schedule, and I don't want to blow it out of proportion, and I look at the fact that the Miami Dolphins, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and the Chargers are all way down here with very easy schedules. If you can pick up a couple of wins in these shitty divisions, Tom, you can make the playoffs with a team that's just above average.
No question.
Because they're that close.
They're that close. Maybe they drafted a quarterback that's going to come in and play well. The whole thing changes. If you draft somebody that can change your team, and all these teams can.
And look at the Philadelphia Eagles down there again.
Yeah.
Teams under 500. They're going to be playing most of the teams under 500.
Let's not forget last year. They were running teams off the grass last year, Philly. And then they had some injuries late, and then they lost the last, I can't remember, 3 out of the last 4 games, I think.
We didn't talk about this, but A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Saquon Barkley, are you kidding me? Those are your top 3 offensive weapons. So Jalen Hurts doesn't have to be great.
Yeah.
He's just got to be solid.
And he's great. He's good.
All right.
All right.
When we switch gears, we're going to be switching gears to who's the greatest team of all time. Okay. So our Super Bowl prediction, I've got the Baltimore Ravens. You've got the Detroit Lions.
Yep.
We move on to the greatest teams of all time. I think the first debate that has to take place, because there are a couple of outliers, is to be on the list, did you have to win the Super Bowl? For me, that's a no-brainer, slam dunk, yes.
No question.
Okay. There are people who consistently want to throw the 2007 New England Patriots who went 16-0.
Look at the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah.
Look at the Buffalo Bills. They had an amazing team.
The Minnesota Vikings went to 4 Super Bowls before the Bills.
Bills had 8 Pro Bowlers, 9 Pro Bowlers, and didn't win a Super Bowl.
Yeah. Fran Tarkenton and Marshall before the Bills, and then with the Bills, Thurman Thomas, Bruce Smith, Jim Kelly. I mean, great teams that couldn't get it done. Tom Brady wins 16 games. It's the best. If you want to have the debate, what's the greatest regular season of all time? All right, they're 16-0.
Yeah.
And I don't think you can debate that, and they were fairly dominant in the vast majority of those games.
Yeah.
But I do think that you're correct that they have to win the Super Bowl to be on this list. Obviously, we're going to talk another dynamic, which is dynasties versus individual teams. I do think it gets harder to keep winning, right? You play so many more games over such a long period of time, and you know better than anybody the wear and tear on your body by even going a little deep into the playoffs. You guys never went further than one game into the playoffs during your career, but it shortens the offseason. The press around a team changes and the expectations change.
Well, like I'm looking at the 78 Steelers. How many times did you have a starter from the Steelers, get traded somewhere back in that time? Nobody. Cherry Bradshaw, Franco Harris, Mean Joe Green, Jack Lambert, Jack Ham. They never got traded. Yeah, Mel
L.C.
Blount.
Greenwood,
Yeah, now
Rocky Blyer.
Now those teams, when they win a Super Bowl, those guys half of them are gone.
Yeah,
they're signing with another team. It's a different.
Mike Webster, may he rest in peace. I mean, the steel curtain was loaded. The Green Bay Packers dynasty is the first major dynasty. Although I think the Cleveland Browns would debate that. They went to the championship game 7 times in the 1950s. Green Bay Packers, led by Ray Nitschke, the captain. Their best team is probably the 1962 team. Nitschke was the MVP. He was also in one of my all-time favorite movies, The Longest Yard, with Burt Reynolds. Quick side list, greatest football movies of all time. Go.
I think my number one is Invincible's up there. It's close.
Wahlberg?
I love that movie. And
what about Rudy? Notre Dame football.
No, Rudy's good. I think the number one movie is Jerry Maguire. And for me, it was all the right moves because it had
Leah Thompson.
It had so many aspects of that movie that I could relate to. The guy was from a small...
Ampipe Valley.
Exactly. From a small town. Everybody's poor. He had a drunk for a brother. He had, the sweet little girlfriend he's getting to at the end of the game, right?
Leah Thompson.
Yeah, all the stuff.
I'll bring her up more than once.
That we look forward to, back in that day. Yeah, Rudy's a great movie. Any Given Sunday's another good football movie. Waterboy, I wouldn't put that in the top.
Waterboy.
Blindside too. Blindside was a great. And Remember the Titans.
Remember the Titans is great. I was actually in the Star Theater in Southfield. Jerry Bruckheimer came in to introduce the movie. We were at a sneak preview. Had no idea. I just, we show up, and the producer of the movie, and not only this, Jerry Bruckheimer's from Detroit. Did you know he's from Detroit?
Yes.
Yeah, from Detroit.
Wow.
But let me give you mine. I already let the cat out of the bag with The Longest Yard. But I agree with Rudy. I agree with Jerry Maguire. For me, high school football is better personified with Friday Night Lights with Billy Bob Thornton. I love that movie.
Yeah.
But the one that resonated for me as a young man was The Program. James Caan, Craig Sheffer, who was also great in River Runs Through It and other movies. Yeah. But Joe Kane at quarterback.
Yeah.
Where he comes into the huddle and looks at the guys and says, all right, let's put the women and children to bed and go looking for dinner.
Yeah.
That is the football line. Although that movie probably cast a little bit of a controversial shadow over college football at the time with the steroid use and everything else. But that's real. That was real.
It was very real.
At least from my perspective, the top 2 or 3 teams are kind of my lifetime, or at least I got to see a lot of the highlights of them. Mm-hmm. I want to kind of start with the era dynasties. I'm going to go back to the 1950s. Obviously, I didn't see any of the 1950s games other than what I was able to garner from all the highlights and talking to my grandfather and my father. And my grandfather actually, palled around with a few of these guys because the 1950s Detroit Lions.
Yeah, the Lions.
What a team the Detroit Lions had.
Bob Kolkowski was a good friend of mine.
Yale Larry was a good friend of my grandfather's. But when you look at the Lions won in 52, 53, They won again in 57. So that's 3 championships in 6 years. They went to a 4th. So they went to 3 championship games in a row, 52, 53, 54.
Didn't even know
They
that.
lost the one in 54 to the Cleveland Browns. All 3 of their wins were also against the Cleveland Browns. So the Browns were in it 7 times in the 50s. But that Lions team, the 2 teams that lost between the winners, so out of the 6 years where they went to 4 championship games, the only 2 years where they didn't go to the championship game were the 2 years that Yale Larry and a few of the other players were serving in the Korean War.
Oh, really?
Then came back from the Korean War and won the World Championship in 1957.
Well, I used to hear stories of them working in the off season. All of them had jobs.
Yeah,
Had a
Joe
bank.
Schmidt, Christensen, Dick Night Train Lane. I mean, these guys they had a legendary secondary. And of course, the Browns of that era, Otto Graham, and then into the Jim Brown era. Great teams for the Browns in the 50s. And then you go into the 60s and you got the Green Bay Packers.
Pretty much.
The Green Bay Packers dominance in their dynasty. I'm going to lever in. It's right at the tail end of my top 5 with the 62 Packers.
Okay.
That's Ray Nitschke winning the MVP, Bart Starr leading the league in passing, Jim Taylor leading the league in rushing. I mean, they got the linebacker, the running back, the quarterback. It's a complete team in Green Bay, and maybe the greatest coach for which the NFL Super Bowl trophy is named after, Vince Lombardi. I'm going to start there. Now give me your next.
It's tough. I haven't. I would go with the Miami Dolphins, the undefeated team.
As your number 1, or are you putting them at the bottom of the top 5?
No. Number 1.
You're
I think
number
they're
1.
the number 1. They're the only undefeated team. Second, they had Don Shula and Earl Morrell, Larry Zonka. I mean, I don't know how you can pick somebody over an undefeated team.
Perfection speaks for itself.
It's almost impossible in the NFL, too. Something always goes wrong. Little things. Somebody gets hurt, or a pass is dropped, or a field goal's missed, or extra points missed. There's always little things like that screw up a perfect season. Then obviously the 1985 Bears, I think, are the second best. With Ditka and Mike Singletary, Walter Payton, Dan Hampton, Richard Dent, Jim McMahon. I mean, and I'm missing a few.
William the Refrigerator Perry?
Perry, yeah, exactly.
You could go through. I mean, I think if you were to build towards the Bears, because dominance, the way you win matters.
You can't build those teams anymore, though. You can't. People don't stay. You go to an NFC championship or you win a Super Bowl, people leave. They get signed by other teams.
But I think a critic would look at you and say the Chiefs are doing it right now before your very eyes. There's a dynasty emerging.
Well, they got Patrick Mahomes. So you take him out of there, they're no dynasty.
Okay. Well,
I don't think so.
And you could say that about a lot of teams.
Yeah, you could.
I'm gonna agree with you though about the 72 Dolphins with Shula, because when you look at that team, Earl Morrall and Bob Greasy split games starting. Morrall didn't start them all. Greasy started some of those games. So when you can play your backup quarterback and still go undefeated.
Yeah.
You got 2 1,000-yard rushers, Mercury Morris and Zonka, both rushed for 1,000 yards that year. That's an amazing football team. But I'm going to go with John Madden, too, and look at the Raiders team. I mean, they lost 2 games in 1976 with John Madden, but they lost the 2 games by 5 points in a very, very competitive era. And you got, Kenny the Snake Stabler. I mean, that team was completely dominant, and their playoff run was also completely dominant. It's what I was going for there is it's how you win. The 92 Cowboys. 92 Cowboys lost 3 games, but you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who ever wants to play the 92 Cowboys.
Sure.
I mean, that team was loaded. They just happened to be playing in an era the NFL was very good and had a ton of talent.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Very
we played them in '94, and they had the same team. The key is there used to be a time too you could keep a team together. The salary cap isn't what it was then, right? So nowadays, if you have a guy it's going to be hard to keep some of the guys we got on the Lions this year. They're trying to. They're doing new deals with them, but you used to see the same guy play every game, every year. That doesn't happen anymore. It just doesn't. So there's something to be said for that too. The salary caps change things, but.
Yeah, I think You can't have a conversation about the greatest teams of all time without mentioning the 49ers, not just the Joe Montana era, but also Steve Young.
Steve Young and Joe Montana, yeah.
The 84 team lost one game, and they lost it by 3 points.
Yeah.
You know, Bill Walsh, probably the godfather of the modern day offense. You know, just the whole spread and passing the football. You know, there were teams that threw the ball. Air Coryell with Dan Fouts, and we talked about the San Diego Chargers of that era, but nobody did it with such balance on both sides of the ball and such finesse. I mean, maybe that was the greatest part of me watching Joe Montana, is that I just felt like if a throw needed to be laid in there on third down, if a throw needed to be there in the red zone, that Montana was going to find a way to get it done.
As you say that, I get back to my original point about head coaching. It's important, don't get me wrong. And like Dan Campbell, when he came in, setting the tone, having direction.
Kicking ass and taking names.
He is, but he didn't get good until he got good players. That's all I'm saying.
But don't good players want to come and play for a guy that they believe in? Isn't there, to an extent?
Yeah, in college and high school, when you're in the NFL, you're getting paid.
Yeah.
Period. Now, mind you, there may be somebody that wanted to come to Detroit and play for Dan Campbell. But you know that your season, I mean, the average length of time you play is 3 years, maybe 2.5 years, and one bad play, you're done.
And you watched Hard Knocks. You didn't buy into the cult of personality that Dan Campbell's doing it differently?
No, there's something to be said. I just think people make too much of it. That's all. I mean, yes. Does it matter who your leader is when you're going into war? Yes. Does it matter that he gets you prepared? Yes. Does it matter that everyone understands their job and that they do their job correctly? Yes.
Yeah, but you don't got to love the guy, right? I mean, people loved Wayne Fontes, and he didn't win very much. I mean, he didn't win enough.
No. Hey, he won enough. I mean, he was there 10 years.
He didn't win enough to get us over the hump and get us into a game that was meaningful in February.
And maybe someone would want to blame that on coaching. I highly doubt. I just don't think it's coaching. But if I had one bad thing to say about Wayne is he hired his drinking buddies to be coaches. His brother, and I liked his brother. And I still do, and he was a good guy, and he was actually a good coach. But when you hire a bunch of your drinking buddies, Herb Patera and all these, and Herb was pretty well known in the NFL too. Coached at Michigan State, was defensive coordinator. So,
isn't it amazing though? I mean, look at the landscape, the fire and brimstone, right? Mike Ditka, right? The '85 Bears. You mentioned that nobody is going to dispute that the '85 Bears are one of the best football teams of all time. And that Mike Ditka was one of the sternest individuals to ever walk up and down the sideline. You'd say the same thing about Don Shula and Tom Landry. You'd say the same thing about Vince Lombardi and Chuck Noll for the Steelers. But then you get into players, coaches that people really liked. John Madden. People really like Dan Campbell right now. Bill Parcells was that old cut from the cloth. It's my way or the highway, just like Bill Belichick. It's a little bit of everything. You kind of have to almost mold to meet your team where they are.
I agree. For instance, Bill Belichick, when I was getting drafted, he brought me into Cleveland 3 times. And a couple times I met just with the linebacker coach. And then the last time I came in, I met with him and Art Modell. I think it was Art Modell. He was the owner. And at that time, he was not a respected guy. But he was the same guy that he was when he had Tom Brady. So, he wasn't winning games and doing what he's doing because he didn't have good players, right? Yeah. You can be the smartest guy in the world. If you don't have good players, it doesn't matter.
No.
It doesn't matter. You got to have the horses.
Every one of these teams that we're mentioning has an unreal roster.
I know. That's the thing, too. When I look at all the NFL rosters, is there a bad roster? There is. I imagine there is, but is there?
I mentioned the 9 teams right there. I think there's 9 teams that are out of it. Not all of them have bad rosters.
No.
But that means there's 20 plus rosters out there that are good football teams.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, like we said last year, I mean, the Chicago Bears were horrible. They beat us. And they beat some other teams they shouldn't have beat too. The Chicago Bears did. They've got talent. They've all got the same amount of money.
And that leads me to like the gelling effect, right? Like
Yes.
when I look at a football team, if I'm designing a football team, a team, right, where if one individual gets hurt, the whole thing isn't flushed down the toilet, like several that we've talked about with Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is out. What do the Chiefs look like? I look at Joe Gibbs and the Washington Redskins of the 80s and early 90s. The 1991 Redskins, do you remember what the quarterback's name was of the 1991 Redskins?
Was it Mark Rippon?
It was Mark Rippon.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Guess so.
Right? Do you remember who the lead running back was on that team?
Yeah, it was the white guy. No.
You're going to say John Riggins.
Was it John Riggins?
It wasn't John Riggins. It was Ernest Biner.
Oh, I remember him.
Right? So
I remember Darryl Green, and I remember...
You look at that. So Joe Gibbs won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks, and one of the quarterbacks that he won a Super Bowl with was the backup, right? I mean, just came in the playoffs with Doug Williams.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So when you look at a great coach who can win, doesn't need Tom Brady, doesn't need Joe Theismann. He can win with whoever you're going to put in front of him. He can move the pieces around. He can get through injuries because he's got the trenches locked down.
If you had his offensive line, you could probably win with almost every quarter. It's just...
That's what I love about what Dan Campbell has done with the Lions. I really look at that offensive line, and I think that you've got the Lions, the Chiefs, and just a couple other teams that can even speak to the San Francisco 49ers, sadly, are one of those teams that we're going to have to go through.
Yeah.
With Trent Williams, I mean, he's a beast.
But back to the overall thing. I mean, there's something... I believe in coaching, and I believe a coach has to lead.
So all that being said, I'm going to give you my top 5 now. I'm going to restrict it down. I'm going to stick with that Washington Redskins team.
The 91 team?
The 91 team.
I've got them in my top 5, yeah.
I'm going to put the 86 New York Giants in there, the Parcells team, just because I just think Lawrence Taylor and that defense is quite possibly the greatest defense that's ever played. But the next one is the Steelers, of that 78 Steelers, and I would say the same thing about that defense. Then I'm going 49ers, 84, Dolphins, 72, Bears, 85.
Bears 85 is your number 1.
It is. Yeah. It is. Where you ended up with the Dolphins, right?
I ended up with the Dolphins just because they're the only undefeated team. That's it.
So we weren't far off.
No.
But we both agree that Belichick goes out like a bitch, and it really is sad because it shouldn't taint his whole career. But boy, did it go sideways at the end of his career.
Yeah, but I mean, how can you think that getting rid of Tom Brady is going to make you a better team? Why would you do that? Is it ego? It's got to be ego.
Why does his owner go to a massage parlor and expect a rub and tug?
At West Palm Beach, that's under video.
There's a lot of question marks about what happened at the end of that franchise. And Tom Brady, Saint Tom, left and went to Tampa Bay and took care of business and put a nice cherry on top of his career. If you're interested in learning more, you can follow us on any of the major platforms, and all the links and information can be found in the show notes of this episode. So any parting words, Beer Man? We're coming to the final close of this. You got anything you want to put out there about the greatest teams of all time?
No.
You don't want to throw the Lions in there?
You got to win more than one game in the playoffs. I think we went to the playoffs 3 out of my 4 years, and
this is how we do it now, because
cool
he's the Beer Man, and I'm Joe Willie.
We're supposed to shotgun these, huh?
No. Ooh. GOATQuest, baby.
GOATQuest.
So go be the greatest of all time at whatever it is that you're doing today.